and it feels a little bit foreboding, because it is. It's times of mourning, times of sadness, and it's a bit of a more serious time. But tonight we're going to discover another perspective on this time of year, and it's going to come from hopefully the ideas that we share tonight will kind of switch around and flip a lot of the traditional themes of the 9 days. So again, today is Rosh Chodesh Av, begins the 9 days. There are certain restrictions I'll mention on a very pragmatic level. There are certain restrictions that are applied for these 9 days. For example, restriction against eating meat or drinking wine, with the exception of Shabbat, which we'll talk about soon. We try to minimize the things that would normally cause us extra doses of joy. So we don't listen to music. There are no haircuts during this time period. If you get excited about a haircut, sorry, not this time of year. We don't go to concerts. I mentioned music before. We don't indulge in meat and wine, with the exception of Shabbat, all to minimize the joyous expressions that we might usually do, and to impress upon us the seriousness of these days. So this Shabbat, we're going to read the Torah portion of Devarim, which is the opening portion in Deuteronomy. And the Torah portion, the Haftorah, is a very special one. It begins with the words Chazon Yeshayahu, which means the vision of Isaiah. And we'll study some texts about this soon. But just know that based on the Haftorah, based on the special book, the special section from Isaiah that's read following the Torah reading, this Shabbat, the entire Shabbat, which is always the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, the Shabbat is known as Shabbat Chazon. So let's jump into the text and find out, what does Chazon mean? Well, I'll give you the spoiler alert. Chazon means vision. So it's the Shabbat of vision, like being able to see something. Why is it called the Shabbat of vision? Because the Haftorah begins, Chazon Yeshayahu, Isaiah's vision. I'm going to share my screen with you, and let's do this together. I'm going to start with text number 1. Give me a moment while I share my screen with you. And here we go. Okay, let's begin. David, please read text number 1. Let me set text 1 up before we jump into the specifics of the Haftarah, Chazon Yeshayahu, Shabbat Chazon. We're going to quickly read from the Code of Jewish Law about the 3 weeks, the 3 Shabbatot, the 3 Shabbats that precede the 9th of Av, and the unique Haftarot that are read on these days. So David, please unmute and read text number 1.
Okay, starting from the 17th of Tammuz, we begin to read the 3 Haftarot of rebuke, namely the 3 sections beginning with Divrei Yirmiyahu, Shimud Dvar Hashem, and Chazon Yeshayahu.
Thank you. Now, this is significant, and I'll tell you why. It's significant because, just as a background, the Haftarot are sections from the books of the prophets that were chosen and selected throughout the year to be read after specific Torah portions. And there's always a thematic connection between the Haftarah and the Torah portion itself. So it doesn't go in order. It's not like you start from the book of Joshua and go through. No, it's selected pieces from the books of the prophets that were selected because thematically they connect with the Torah portion. There's an exception. These 3 weeks, there are other exceptions, but just here's one exception. These 3 weeks, what David just read in text 1 is telling us the exception to the rule. These are not Haftarot that were chosen because they somehow thematically connect with the Torah portion. They were chosen because they thematically connect with the time of year that we find ourselves. which is the 3 weeks, the time that we mourn the destruction of the Holy Temple, both Holy Temples. And therefore, the 3 sections that are read in this time of year, Divrei Yirmiyahu, Shema Devar Hashem, and Chazon Yeshayahu, they all deal with the prophecies concerning the destruction of the Holy Temple. So thematically, we don't read Haftarot connected with Matot or Maseh or Devarim. We don't read Haftarot connected with the theme of the portion, but rather with the theme of the time of year, which is destruction. So what does the Haftarah actually say? So what does Chazon Yeshayahu? By the way, take a look at where this is coming from. Isaiah, Yeshayahu, 1:1-7. This is how the book of Isaiah begins. Okay, and this is what is read this coming Shabbat. And every single year, the Shabbat preceding the 9th of Av, this is the Haftarah that's read, Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah, which speaks about the temple's destruction, a prophecy about the temple's destruction. Take a look. Susan, please, if you will, please unmute and read the translation text number 2. This is the opening first 7 verses of the book of Isaiah.
The vision of Isaiah and son of which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem.
Hold on one second. I realize now we have 2 Susans.
That's fine.
My apology. Okay, so
she can do it. She can.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
We see, look at this. We have multiple Susans. It's a blessing.
A popular name.
I meant Susan Robinson because Susan R, you came up on my list next. So we'll just go in order just so it's easier for me. So Susan Robinson, please take it away. Vision of Isaiah. Oh, hold on one second. You're muted.
Okay. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for God has spoken. Children I have raised and exalted, yet they have rebelled against me. An ox knows his owner, and a donkey his master's crib. Israel does not know, Israel does not consider. Woe to a sinful nation, a people heavy with iniquity, evil-doing seed, corrupt children. They forsook God, they provoked the Holy One of Israel, they drew backwards. Why are you beaten when you still continue to rebel? Every head is afflicted with illness, and every heart with malaise.
Thank you. So, and this is just the opening, and you see the nature of this haftarah, of these of this section. This is not the extent of what's read this Shabbat after the Torah reading. The haftarah is much longer. This is just the first 7 verses, but you get the theme. The theme is bad days are coming, and why are they coming? Because the Jews have turned away from God. This line is very telling. This dramatic paragraph or this dramatic verse is very telling. Even an ox knows its owner. Even a donkey knows its master. Israel forgets about God. That's the statement. That's the prophecy. And it was intended to inspire the Jews to tshuva, to repentance. Did it work? Let's put it this way. The temple was destroyed. So clearly it was not effective. If the goal was to turn the people around and to save the temple from being destroyed, that did not work. So if we were to characterize the nature of this haftarah, of this prophecy, the opening prophecy of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah has many chapters. Many people love quoting Isaiah. But how does Isaiah begin? It begins with a chastising of the Jewish people. So clearly the nature of the haftarah is one of negativity, of a prophecy or a promise of destruction, God forbid. It's a negative energy. Like I said before, this Shabbat is called, I'm going to highlight the word in Hebrew, Shabbat Chazon. Chazon, that's the first Hebrew word. I'm highlighting it right here on the screen. Chazon Yeshayahu. Chazon means the vision or vision, right? In English, vision. Chazon, it's called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of the vision. Whose vision? Isaiah's vision. Was it a good vision or not a good vision? In fact, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you all. And I'm going to ask you what should be a very simple question. Please unmute yourself or type in the chat box. How would you characterize the vision of Isaiah? Good vision, not such a good vision. Help me out here.
Not such a good vision.
Thank you. Not such a good vision. For thousands of years, the Shabbat has been called Shabbat Chazon because of Chazon Yeshayahu, the Haftarah, the prophecy, which portends, which predicts what we're going to recall on the 9th of Av next week, the destruction of the temple. So by all accounts, a negative Haftarah. And this was true for thousands of years until the 18th century. With the advent of the Hasidic movement, there was another approach introduced into the world in general, specifically regarding this time of year, which we're going to get to in a moment. But let's just read something fascinating in our text 3a and 3b, about how we are meant to conduct ourselves on this Shabbat Chazon. So I'm going to share my screen with you once again. Here we go. And let's fast forward to text number 3. If you think about it, the nature of the Haftarah is so negative, you would imagine that it would affect somehow the Shabbat itself, and indeed, this may be the case. Okay, Susan K, please jump in. Now we got you. Text 3a, this is coming from one halachic source, the Minhagei Maharak. Take a look, text 3a. Please read.
Our rabbis had the custom to adjust their Shabbat dress on Shabbat Chazon by not changing into all the typical Shabbat clothing. This was done to demonstrate a small sign of mourning.
Thank you. So what we have here in text 3a is an ancient Jewish custom, which was to dress a little bit differently on this Shabbat in order to indicate that it is a sad Shabbat. It's in the 9 days, the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, and it's a Shabbat in which we feel the negativity of the prophecy and the negativity of the day. All right, let's do one more text. Text 3b. This is coming from the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, who tells us that today we don't do this, okay? Nonetheless, we know the ancient customs. Susan or Richard, I'll let you all fight it out. But if you don't mind, one of you please read text 3b.
I can't see it.
Go for it.
Okay.
Can't see it.
Okay.
Different. Oh, that up there? Okay,
Yes.
Got it. Okay. For 2 or 3 generations, this has not been the custom in our communities on Shabbat Hazon. Rather, we wear all the typical Shabbat clothing. Even the leaders of the previous generations would likewise wear all the typical Shabbat clothing, explaining that failure to do so would be akin to mourning publicly on Shabbat. For this reason, we wear Shabbat clothing even when the 9th of Av itself falls on Shabbat.
Perfect. Thank you. So what's going on here in the text is we have an ancient custom where one halachic authority says, it might be it's a custom to modify one's clothing. We have another source that says, don't modify the clothing. But even the fact that there's a possibility to modify the clothing indicates that this Shabbat, the energy is somewhat of a negative nature. And this is how it stood, like I mentioned before, for thousands of years until the 18th century. I want to share with you one very epic teaching of the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev was one of the disciples of the Maggid of Mizrich, who in turn was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. So let me just quickly give you the tree of the Hasidic movement, so to speak. So the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, was the founder of the Hasidic movement. The one who continued the Hasidic movement was Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich, and he had many students who each became a Hasidic master and leader in their own right, a Rebbe in their own right. That's where all the Hasidic movements essentially come from the students of the Maggid. The youngest student was the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. There were other students, including the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of the town of Berdichev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was known for many things, including his advocacy. Always looked at other people in a positive light, no matter what they were doing, what they were saying. He always had a positive spin on how to view others. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak has a positive spin on Shabbat Chazon, which is absolutely incredible. I'm going to share my screen with you once more, and let's read this together. Okay, here we go, sharing the screen. And this is, okay, continues on this, or the English is here. Okay, text number 4, let's ask Linda. Linda, please read, if you will, text number 4.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Are you able to? Okay, good. The theme of Shabbat Chazon is illustrated by a parable. There was once a father who had a precious child for whom he made an expensive piece of clothing. The child wasn't careful with it, so it ripped into many pieces. The father made another such garment, which the child ripped as well. He made a third garment, but instead of giving it to the child to wear, he stored it away, only showing it to the child rarely on special occasions. He would see, if you behave correctly, you will be allowed to wear it. In this fashion, the father was getting his son used to behaving appropriately until such behavior would become second nature. Then there would be no reason to worry. This is the meaning of Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of the vision, where every Jew is shown a vision of the third temple from afar. Oh, wow.
Yeah, now I cannot, it's hard to describe how revolutionary this take on Shabbat Chazon is. For thousands of years, century after century, this Shabbat was known as Shabbat Chazon for the simple reason that it's the Shabbat in which the Haftorah Chazon Yeshayo is read, which portends and predicts the destruction of the temple and chastises the Jews for not getting their act together, for not being obedient to God. Okay, negative. To the point that some suggested to demonstrate this in clothing, others said no, but at least some said yes. So the energy of Shabbat, of this Shabbat, seems to be in a negative nature. Comes along Rabbi Levi of Berdichev, the great Hasidic master, and he says, you know why it's called Shabbat Chazon? It's a Shabbat of vision. Whose vision? Not Isaiah's vision. Isaiah's vision is so 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. Isaiah's vision is, no. Why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Because on this Shabbat, you and I are the ones that are shown a vision. We're the ones that get the prophecy, not Isaiah. Yeah, he also did. But why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Because we get the vision. What's the vision? So here's the parable. Let's break down the parable and make sure we understand it. There's a child who gets a suit, and like children do, you know what happens when you get your kid nice clothing? Yeah, all right. It ends up sometimes it ends up ripped. This is what happened. It got ripped. He gets another nice garment. It gets ripped again. This time he gets a third garment, but his parents, his father, in the way in the parable says that his father buys the suit and puts it away and says, when you're ready, when you're mature, when you know how to take care of things, I'll give you the suit. Now, I don't know, this is my parenthetical thing. Having kids and suits and clothing, I'll tell you this, it may not be a great idea to buy a suit for a kid and kind of hold it. On a very practical level, they'll probably grow out of it. I mean, unless you're banking on the kid, improving, turning around right away, which could be the intention. But nonetheless, the suit, all right, but that's the parable that's given. The point is that in this case, the child demonstrated the lack of ability to take care of this special item. So, not giving up on the child, but the parents are saying, when you're ready, here it is. From time to time, they show the child the garment. That excites the child, encourages the child to get better in behavior, and then hopefully will receive that suit. Obviously, I probably don't have to break it down, but I will anyway. The analog, right? The nimshal is obvious, right? What's the nimshal? What's the analog? What are we learning from this? God gave us a temple. We didn't take care of it. It was destroyed. God gave us a second temple. We didn't take care of it. It was destroyed. God builds the third temple spiritually. And and says, when you're ready for it, I'm going to give it to you. From time to time, shows us a vision. And shows us a vision of what? This third temple that's already built on a spiritual level. And when does this viewing, so to speak, or showing happen? When does God show us the third temple? This Shabbat, Shabbat Chazon. Wow. On this Shabbat, you and I get to see our souls, right? Not your eye, it's a spiritual vision. So your soul gets to see the third temple. That's pretty special. And that's pretty exciting. And you know what? If you're the child in the analogy or in the parable, when you see the suit, you don't feel like you're being shamed or shunned or teased. No. When you see the suit, you're encouraged, you're excited. Like this is what's waiting for me. Let's go get it. This is the prize. When God shows us the temple, what's the reaction? What's our soul's reaction? Joy and excitement and anticipation. So let's continue. According to the Berditchever, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Berditchev, yeah, what's the energy of the Shabbat? I'll say it. What's the energy of Shabbat? According to this parable, what's the energy? Joy, positivity, excitement, anticipation. That's what the energy is. So this prompts the Apter Rebbe to say the following. Take a look, see at text number 5. It's a short one, so I'll, hold on, it's at the bottom of this page. I'll just read it. Okay, here we go. The Apter Rebbe, text 5, says Shabbat Chazon right here at the bottom. Shabbat Chazon is the greatest Shabbat of the year. Based on the Hasidic understanding of Shabbat Chazon, it's the greatest Shabbat of the year. Now, again, I probably don't have to tell you this, but this is 180 degrees different than what we normally think about the Shabbat. It's completely opposite. Completely opposite. It's not just like, different interpretations, different takes. This angle, that angle, complementary. No complementary, nothing. Completely opposite. The traditional way of understanding the Shabbat is sad, foreboding, negative, right? It's a negative energy to the point that some suggested in how halachic works that one might consider the custom of dressing a little bit less nice. We don't practice that. Our custom is not to do that custom, but that was a custom that was discussed. That's the traditional way of understanding the Shabbat. Comes along the Berditchever Rebbe, and he says, in the 1700s, and he says, new take. We got a new take here. It's not the negative, we got a positive take. God is showing us the temple. It's a Shabbat of anticipation, of joy, of excitement. God is telling us, God is showing us this is real and it's happening. All you need to do is make it happen. It's going to happen. Greatest Shabbat of the year, according to the Apter Rebbe. Like I said before, we always have differences of opinions. I mean, it's Judaism, right? We're very seasoned and trained to have different takes, but such a difference from one extreme to the other, from like the lowest of sadness to the height of joy. And both are explanations for why it's called Chazon. That seems a little bit wild. That seems, both takes are explaining the word Chazon, vision. Either it's Isaiah's vision of doom and gloom, or our soul's vision of the third temple, which is exciting and positive. So which one is it? I know it's easy to say both, but how do you pull off this both? Should I feel sad or should I feel excited? You got to tell me what to do here. Tonight, we're going to, if all goes well, this is my plan. I'm going to share with you a very deep way to understand the entire episode of the temple's destruction. Understanding it from a take that will just change everything. And based on that take on this entire situation, when I say situation, let me clarify, the temple's destruction, based on this new take, which is powerful, everything should, if all goes well, everything should make sense. We'll understand how on the one hand there is sadness, on the other hand, there is profound joy and anticipation. They're all going to make sense once we have the key to unlock this mystery, which is a new explanation, a new insight into what happened on the 9th day of thousands of years ago. Okay, so just to recap what we've done so far, we described this Shabbat as Shabbat Chazon. We explained how it got the name Shabbat Chazon. It's the Shabbat in the 9 days preceding the 9th of Av, the day that the temple was destroyed. It's called Chazon because of the prophecy at the beginning of the book of Isaiah, Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah, where God basically tells him to tell the people, this is not going to end well. How do you not recognize me? This is not going to end well, God is basically saying. Therefore, there is some element of sadness that some have suggested, although we don't do it in practice. And then we went the other direction and we presented the Hasidic take on why it's called Shabbat Chazon, not because of the Haftarah necessarily, but because we are all shown, each of us is shown a vision of the temple, the third temple, which should excite us and encourage us to push on and to get to the magical moment of getting the temple rebuilt. So the question that we ended off with is, how do we reconcile these two completely different interpretations and takes on the very same Shabbat, the very same name, Chazon? What's going on? All right, so let's talk about the temple's destruction. So let's ask, for those of you that know a little bit of history, who destroyed, and please unmute yourself, who destroyed? There's no competition, by the way. So if you buzz in first, it's good, but we love everybody here. And there's no cash prize, in case you're wondering. Sorry, I know now no one's going to answer, but just for the sake, just for the cause, who destroyed the first temple, the first holy temple in Jerusalem? Which nation, which emperor, which king, who destroyed the first temple? Go for it.
Wasn't it the Assyrians?
Nebuchadnezzar?
Nebuchadnezzar?
Nebuchadnezzar, yes, and he was the head of. The Assyrians followed the Babylonians.
Okay.
Babylonians. Okay. By the way, excellent. I know some of you also, I could tell that on your faces, some of you had that answer as well. But the good news is that no one got it because it wasn't phrased in the form of a question. I'm joking. That's not the rules for tonight. But the first temple is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. I always get stuck with the English version of it, so I'm more comfortable with the Hebrew. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel, Melech Bavel, he is the fearsome head of the Babylonians who destroys the first temple. Well, what if I told you that is not necessarily accurate based on the book of Jeremiah? Yep, well, you don't have to. What if I'm telling you that right now. Based on the book of Jeremiah, that information, that little factoid of history may not be so accurate as you will see as I share my screen once again right now. So take a look, stay with me here. Take a look at text number 6 from the book of Jeremiah. Let's ask Steve Horowitz, please read text number 6, Jeremiah. Take it away. Hold on. Yeah, there you go.
Behold, I send and I will take all the families of the north, God says, and to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I will bring them upon this land and upon its inhabitants and upon all the nations around, and I will destroy them and make them for a desolation and for a hissing and for perpetual ruin.
Thank you. And there's an astonishing phrase here that I hoped you picked up on. Somebody unmute yourself and tell me what is shocking about that text.
Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant.
Okay, thank you. This phrase right there is shocking. Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, the king of Babylon, is the one who destroyed God's temple, who destroyed Jerusalem, who exiled the Jewish people. And God is calling him my servant? Are you kidding me? God says, my servant? But what's more is that if you were following along this text, you might have noticed something else. Who's responsible for the exile? Who's responsible? This is a question, please. Who's responsible for the exile?
Hashem.
Yeah. Behold, I send, God, this is God speaking, God says, right? I send and I will take all the families of the north. That refers to the 10 lost tribes, by the way, who lived in the northern kingdom of Israel. And to Nebuchadnezzar, my servant, yeah, I will, I'm not sure where that goes, either the first half or the second half. It doesn't really matter. And I will bring them upon this land and upon its inhabitants, and I will destroy them and make for them a desolation. This is God speaking. So if there was any suspicion, perhaps, right, that it's Nebuchadnezzar and it's some sort of enemy of the Jewish people that's destroying the temple, etc., let this come as a counter to that. The book of Jeremiah clearly says that it's God who brought down the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people, utilizing, if you will, Nebuchadnezzar as his servant or his tool to make it happen. That is the implication. It's not even implication. That's what the book of Jeremiah says. That's what God says. Which raises, no pun intended, all puns always intended, which raises a very critical question. Let me, I was gonna say unmute, but let me stop sharing for a moment. There is a law. There is a halacha, Jewish law, that says that a person is not allowed to destroy a part of the temple. You can't. You're not allowed to destroy, demolish, deface, in any way mess up God's holy temple. If you're visiting, back in the day, if you're visiting Jerusalem, you're on the Temple Mount, you cannot take out a hammer and a chisel and take a stone for the road. It's not how it works. You cannot damage anything. You cannot mess up anything. It's against Jewish law. Let's read this inside. I'm going to share my screen once more, and let's read this inside. This is what we're calling the demolition prohibition, only because of the rhyme. This is from the book of Rambam, the Mishnah Torah, written by Rambam Maimonides. Take a look. Let's see. David Lazan, please read text 7a, right here at the top of page 25.
It is forbidden to destroy the temple or synagogues or houses of study.
Boom, there you go. So if you had other thoughts in mind, let this come and dissuade you. No permission to destroy the temple, the holy temple in Jerusalem, or even synagogues, houses of study. You cannot destroy holy spaces. Take a look at what Maimonides continues to say. Take a look. David, please read this one as well.
One who demolishes a single stone from the altar, any part of the temple building, or the floor of the temple courtyard between the entrance hall and the altar with a destructive intent is worthy of lashes, as the verse states, and you shall destroy their altars. Do not do so to God your Lord.
All right, now this verse, I believe we had it recently. This verse, in the Torah portions, this verse at the end tells the Jewish people upon entering the land of Israel, formerly known as the land of Canaan, to destroy idolatrous altars, destroy their altars, the altars of idolatry. And then the Torah says, FYI, do not do so to God, your Lord, which means don't destroy God's altar. So this is the prohibition of damaging any part of the temple, the altar or anything, or any part. Right? A single stone from the altar, any part of the temple building. And as we saw in text 7a, this is extended beyond even the temple to synagogues and places of Torah study. A person is not permitted to destroy. Okay, good. We have information. In case you're wondering why we're talking about this now, don't worry. We're going to weave everything together in a moment, but just stay with me. One more introduction, one more piece. And that final piece of this puzzle is the notion the idea that God keeps the mitzvot that he gives us to keep. This is found in the Midrash on the book of Exodus, which is text number 8. Adina Malka, please read. This is such a beautiful text. Please read text number 8. Please unmute your, yeah, there we go.
With the traits of God?
Yes, exactly.
The traits of God are different than the traits of human beings. A human being instructs others while he does nothing. God is different. What he does, he instructs the Jewish people to do and to guard.
This is such a huge, thank you. This is such a huge teaching. The Midrash is telling us that God is not like people. People love to tell other people what to do when they themselves don't do it. People are hypocritical. They say, do as I say, but not as I do. People love bossing other people around. Do this, do that. And they themselves, no respect for the same protocol. The Midrash says that God is different. God is not a flawed human being. God forbid. God is very different. God does what he commands. In fact, it works the other way around. If you look at the Midrash, and you might have picked up on it, it says God is different, but look at the next line. What he does, he instructs the Jewish people to do and to guard. It's not like because he told it to us, so he'll do it also. No. The Midrash is saying that what God values, he shares with us. What God is already doing and respecting, he shares with us to do and respect, to guard. Which means the following. If God tells us not to destroy the temple, you know what that means? If God tells us not to remove a stone, a single stone from the altar, you know what that means? It means that God is not violating those things either, which begs the question, and by now the circle is complete. We've now set up almost an impossible question to answer. We started off from the book of Jeremiah 25, which says that it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar who destroyed the temple, it was God. And he was God's messenger, God's servant. Step 1. Step 2 was, there's a prohibition. We are not allowed to destroy even a single stone from the temple, and from the altar, from the temple. And step number 3 is that God keeps his own commandments. And now the question is complete. If God, and we can all almost say this together, although I'll just say you don't have to unmute yourselves, but we can probably all sing the question aloud. If God keeps his own commandments, and he commanded us not to destroy the temple, yeah? So how does God destroy the temple? God is bound by his own law to not destroy the temple, and yet he did, which means that in essence, God violated his own God violated his own Torah, his own law. And that doesn't make sense because God doesn't violate his law. And yet God destroyed his temple. You see, if any of these points shifted, there's no question. But we have 1, 2, 3 points conspiring together to create an almost impossible question to answer. You see, if God didn't destroy the temple, then there's no question. It was some dude who was the king of Babylon. So don't blame God, blame Nebuchadnezzar, blame Babylon. If there's no prohibition against destroying a temple, then there's no problem here either. God destroyed the temple. If God doesn't have to keep his own commandments, there's no question. We have a prohibition, but not God. But number 1, God did destroy. There is a prohibition against destroying, and God is bound by the mitzvah because it's his own commandment, which begs the question, then how did he destroy? If God says, I will not destroy, essentially by giving us the commandment to not destroy, God is saying essentially that he's not going to destroy. So how does he destroy? There's one answer. There's only one possible answer. It's such an airtight question. It's such a question. There's only one possible answer. And that is that the temple wasn't destroyed. Bombshell. There's no other way to answer the question. God destroyed the temple. We can't destroy the temple. He can't destroy the temple. So then what happened? The only possible answer is it wasn't destroyed. And I know what you're thinking. was destroyed. Hear me out. See, there's one exception to the rule of not removing any stones from the temple. There's one exception. You might know the exception. The exception, or for that matter, when it comes to a synagogue. Let's talk about synagogues for a second. Probably easier to relate to. Yeah, there's a halacha. Jewish law says you can't destroy, you can't knock down, you can't raise a synagogue. Can you think of one case where you might be able to? All right, you have to
build a new one.
Yeah, if you're building a new one, that's better than the original. Why? Because then guess what? You're not destroying the synagogue. You're doing renovations. And when it comes to renovations, sometimes you got to take down a wall or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20. That's the way, that's renovation. Renovation is not destruction. Yeah? Just turn on HGTV, right? That cable channel that loves home renovations. They're always smashing walls down. The purpose is not to destroy. The purpose is to build. But guess what? Sometimes in order to build, you got to take down a wall. Yeah? By raise of hand. Who has ever been part of a renovation in which they took down a wall? By raise of hand. There you go. So you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, even if your hand didn't go up, I'm assuming that you have or have seen something or been privy to something like that, right? Don't worry. I know not everyone's, who has the energy, right? It's 8:20 at night. Who's lifting their hands anymore? But here's my point. In the context of renovation, there's demolition. But that demolition is not destruction. It's building. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, he's the one who asked this question, the halachic question, that has no answer. It's such a good question, there's no answer, unless you change the nature of what happened and explain that it wasn't destruction, but rather renovation. Let's take a look at some texts. I think I'm going to jump in and read now, just in the interest of time. Take a look at, no. Let's take a look at, no. Let's keep on going. Here we go, text 11. I'm going to read some text. The Ramah, the great Ramah, the great Ashkenazi halachic authority in the Code of Jewish Law writes, text 11, it is forbidden to demolish any part of a synagogue. That first half, Maimonides wrote that. We know that. That's old news. Oh, second half, unless the purpose is to build a new one. Boom! All of you that were mouthing or verbalizing, right? Building, that's the exception to the rule. When I ask, can you think of a hypothetical where you're allowed to knock down a synagogue? The answer is to build. You got it. The Ramah says it. In the Code of Jewish Law, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, he says, you can't demolish unless you're building, because then it's not demolition. And look how the Rebbe puts it. It's unbelievable. It's so daring. It's such a daring approach. The Rebbe says this was the whole purpose of the temple's destruction. God wished to improve the temple so that it would no longer be a man-made structure which eventually ceases to exist. Rather, it would become a divine structure, an eternal edifice. Thus, the first and second temples were destroyed as a means to pave the way for building an enhanced edifice, the third temple, which will be a divine structure. It emerges that ultimately the destruction of the two temples was an act of building, not an act of ruin and destruction. Let me explain. The Rebbe's premise is that anything that is built by human hands is temporary. Why? Because something that a human builds cannot last longer than the person themselves. Are you with me? I know it can physically last longer, but it can't be in a different category than the one who built it. If a mortal being created something, it too will then have mortality, because you cannot import. Is that the right word?
Impart.
Thank you. Thank you. That's, my vowels are messed up. Yeah, thank you. You can't impart a quality within something that you don't possess. So a human being who's not eternal, at least in body, cannot impart. eternality upon something that they've created, which is why the first temple and second temples were not destined to be eternal edifices. They couldn't because they were created by mortal hands. Solomon, the returning exiles from Babylon, etc. The only time the temple can stand forever is if it's built by God Almighty, who is eternal. Built by eternal hands, euphemistically, God does not have hands, but built by an eternal builder with a capital B, the temple can stand eternally, which is the temple of the third temple, the temple of the Messianic age. Which means that the one thing holding back the everlasting temple from happening or from being was a mortal edifice that was standing in the way. So what do? If you have something that's up, that's not desired, yeah, you have walls up, oh, I don't like that look anymore, or that's not going to work. What do? You take them down. The Rebbe says when the first temple was destroyed and when the second temple was destroyed, it wasn't destruction, it was demo day. We're building a new temple, folks. We got to clear out the old so that we can start paving the way for the new. Which is why, hey Reeves, which is why we have something that is absolutely astonishing. A story from our sages. Take a look at what I'm about to share with you. This is going to be text number 14 from the Midrash. This is a story of a man, an Arab, and a cow. A man was plowing when his cow suddenly called out. I'm assuming the cow said moo, but I can't be sure. An Arab was passing by and heard the cow. He said, Jew, Jew, unyoke your cow, free the stake of your plow, for your holy temple has now been destroyed. By the tone of the cow's voice, this fellow could tell that the temple had been destroyed. The cow then lowed a second time, said the Arab, Jew, Jew, yoke your cow, reset the stake of your plow, for the Redeemer has now been born. This midrashic, very enigmatic midrashic teaching is less about cows and predictions and more about how instantaneous the building commences once the temple is down. Are you with me? In one moment, the existing edifice is taken down. In the next moment, the Redeemer has now been born, which means the stage has been set for the next round of building. The existing has to be taken away to get to the new thing. I've shared this example countless times of the great rabbi of the Talmudic era who is moving from Bavel to Yerushalayim, from Babylon to the Holy Land. And he fasted to forget all of the Torah learning that he studied in Babylon so that he would be a fresh canvas, a clean slate to study in the land of Israel, which was studying Torah on a higher level. Because sometimes you can build on what was, but sometimes you cannot. What was gets in the way necessarily of what could be or what will be, and therefore it must come down. You and I can find examples in our own lives where as long as something stood, whether it was a relationship, whether it was a job, whether it was a perspective, as long as that stood, you could not go further. The only way you went further is when what was destroyed. I don't have to give you the example. You have your own example. Everyone has their own example or knows of an example in which this truth is absolutely true. That sometimes what is will block what can be and what needs to be. So what do then? You tear it down. You burn it all down. Not because you want to see things burn, but because you want to build something new. And to build the new, if it's radically new, you have to get rid of what was. Another example. This is an easy example because I was mentioning examples that might hurt. Examples that you and I know the pain of when something is destroyed, but what came after that redeemed it. Nonetheless, a painful experience within us. Let's talk about a more neutral example, a seed, something that I've shared many times before. You plant the seed in the ground. What is the first thing the seed does? It decomposes. And it's only when the seed is decomposed that it can then blossom or produce the growth of the tree or whatever it is that the seed is. If the seed remains a seed, if the seed never lets go of itself, if it never breaks itself down or allows itself to be broken down by the soil, all you're going to have is a seed in the ground, and that's it. No growth. The growth happens when the seed is destroyed. When the seed is no more seed, then it can become something radically different. As long as it is what it is, it cannot be what it can be, what it could be. To quote one of my teachers, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, if you think what you thought and you say what you said and you do what you did, you'll have what you had. That's it. If you're stuck with what was, that is what is. If you want something new, you got to get rid of the old. And so the Rebbe explains this is the intention, God's intention, not Nebuchadnezzar's intention. No, he was an enemy. He hated the Jews. He wanted to destroy the temple. That was his intention. But it doesn't matter what the tool's intention is. It matters what the architect's, what the creator's intention was, what God's intention. What was God's intention in the destruction of Temple 1 and Temple number 2? Building something greater that can only be built once this is taken down. We do not have time to explain this in its fullest depth in every last bit of detail of how exactly the temple and its destruction and the exile of the Jewish people over these last 2,000 years have all been steps to precipitate a greater time. In fact, I'm just wrapping up now writing a lesson for JLI, the Jewish Learning Institute, that will be taught, please God, next spring. They're doing a course on Mashiach, on the Messiah. And the class that I'm authoring is a look, I'm sure I'm allowed to share this information, is a look at the expanse of the entire recorded Jewish history to understand how every single episode in Jewish history has been a step forward. Even the ones that look like a step back are in fact a step forward. And in that class, the class explores this very topic, but just in short, the bottom line is the destruction of Temple 1 and Temple number 2 were not for the sake of punishment or destruction or doom and gloom. They were, from the truest perspective, for the sake of growth and rebuilding. Sometimes, well, every time. To get something radically new, you have to get rid of what was, because then it's not radically new. If you just add on to what was, it's not radically new. God wants something radically new and radically better, the third temple. For that to happen, you got to get rid of what was. With this insight in mind, we can circle back to how we started this class. Well, hold on. Before I do that, let me just make sure we have all the answers up until this point. We quoted Jeremiah saying that God destroyed the temple. We cited Jewish law that says we can't destroy the temple. We then cited the measure that says that God follows his own rules. And we asked the question, how did God destroy his temple? And we answered that God didn't destroy his temple. God's rebuilding his temple. It's taking a while because it's a pretty grand project. Once it's done, we'll see why it took so long. We'll know why it needed such a duration. But we know this, it was not a destruction, it was a demolition in the process of rebuilding something infinitely greater, fundamentally different. So that should answer the middle questions. But let's go back to the beginning of the class. What's the energy of the Shabbat Chazon? Is it doom and gloom destruction? Or is it a vision of the third temple? You know what the answer is? Both. But now it makes sense. Both is an easy answer, but before it didn't make sense. Now we have the language and the tools to understand it. Let me explain. Getting back to the personal example that we all have for this concept of needing to lose everything to get something radically different. When a person, God forbid, loses something dear, whatever situation, whatever scenario, whatever that is, and it turns out that was the only way they could have then got what they got. So it worked out. Okay. But how did it feel when it was taken away? How did it feel? It hurts. And the truth is, here's the truth. Even if you knew and you believed that it was going to be for something much greater, on some level it would still hurt. Because at the end of the day, losing is losing. Losing something is still losing something. And something being demolished is still something being demolished. And it still hurts. The seed decomposing is still painful for the seed. Now, I don't have insider information. I haven't spoken to seeds lately, but it's still painful on a surface level. It's just that when you know the truth, you can appreciate the benefit of the pain. Yeah, it's like dentistry. Yeah, sometimes you need an extraction. Is it pleasant? No. God forbid no one should ever need an extraction, right? I'm just saying, right? You need it. It's for something, I don't know if it's something greater, whatever. Sometimes, maybe my dentistry example is not the best. Sometimes you need to undergo something painful to get to something much greater. Is it painful? It's painful. Does knowing that something greater is going to be born of it make it easier? Yes. If you can hold that thought, yes. On some levels, is it still painful? Yes. Both are true. Is it painful? Yes. Is it the next thing? Is it the necessary step for the next big thing? Yes. Does it build anticipation for what's coming next? Yes. Does it hurt? Yes. Are both true? Yes. So Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat that precedes the 9th of Av. Every Shabbat we think about what's coming up next week. That's the nature of Shabbat. We reflect on the previous week and we look forward to the next week. This Shabbat is looking forward to the 9th of Av. So how are we supposed to, what's the mood like? Yeah, you're wearing a mood ring. What's the mood like? Sad, joyous, foreboding, anticipation. What are you feeling? Both. On a surface level, the temple was destroyed. We've been exiled. Tremendous suffering over the last 2,000 years. It's a very difficult experience that we've had from the 9th of Av on. So yeah, it's not a happy day. And because of that, it's a fast day. Because of that, there are restrictions right now and the days preceding that day. The 9th of Av is a 24-hour fast, like Yom Kippur. So yeah, Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah. But at the same time, like the Berditchever said, it's a Shabbat in which we envision what is yet to come. Because we know that God didn't just destroy his temple, just because we were misbehaving, just because he's punishing us, but because God took away the temple in order to get a much grander edifice, a radically greater edifice, one that's not built by human hands, but by divine creation, one that can stand eternally, therefore. And the only way to do that is by God taking away the stuff that we built. And so, seen from this perspective, the 9th of Av and what happened is hopeful for a better future. It's paving the way for a better future. And reflecting on that truth, that deeper truth, on the Shabbat before the 9th of Av, allows this Shabbat to be one of anticipation, one of joy, one in which we are redoubling our efforts to do everything we can to realize God's vision of what can be and to make that our reality. And so the 9th of Av is still a day of mourning, but now we know the truth. The Hasidic movement revealed the deeper truth. And therefore, it was the Hasidic masters who revealed to us this deeper perspective in pain. And it's a truth that is not only true on a global or universal level regarding history, Judaism, Jewish people, and the Holy Temple, but it's true on a micro level as well, on the individual level. The message of this class on a personal level for you and I is when we encounter challenge, we have two ways that we can look at it. When we encounter loss, there are two ways that we can look at it. When what we were enjoying is torn down, when it all goes up in smoke, when it's burnt all the way down to the ground, you and I have two ways to look at it. Either this is a disaster and a tragedy, or it hurts, but what can we rebuild on this place? What can we rebuild that is radically greater than what was? That requires a lot of guts, that perspective. That requires a lot of faith in yourself and in God. That requires a lot of positivity and hope. And that's what Judaism asks of us. Not just to look at the surface, not just to look at the loss and mourn that, but to look at the potential of what could be. One of the prime ministers, or one of the presidents of Israel, after the Yom Kippur War, came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Brooklyn. And the Rebbe said to him, "What's the mood in Israel?" And he said, "Everyone's disillusioned. And they're asking, they're not sure what to do. They're asking why. The Rebbe said, that's not the question to ask. The question is not why. The question is what now? What do we do now? How do we build? Doesn't matter what we lost. Let's talk about what we build next." It's a brave perspective. It doesn't ignore the pain. It's not, glossing over the pain. It's looking inward and looking deep and asking ourselves, how can this translate into something radically greater than before, amidst the pain? It's the only noble, it's really, it's not a judgment statement. This is a truth statement. So it's not judging, if we're not at that point yet, but it's really the only noble response to loss is building. Because what else? Just to experience the loss. The Hasidic movement encouraged us on this Shabbat to not look at the loss and just bemoan what we don't have, but to look at that third suit, at the third temple, that's going to be way more magnificent than the others. And to think about how we can make it a reality today. And in doing so, we're motivated to keep on keeping on and keep on in a greater measure. Let this be a comfort for us this Shabbat and a comfort for us historically, but also in our personal lives. Let's always endeavor to translate demolition into building something amazing. Thank you for joining me tonight for another edition of Torah Studies. I hope you found it meaningful. And I hope it resonated for you. I know, speaking for myself, this topic is, for me, is very powerful, and I hope it was as well for you. Thank you. And if anyone has questions or comments, I'm staying on to discuss. Actually, before I open up the floor, I just want to mention that this Sunday, speaking of the temple, we have a very prominent Israel archaeologist known as the Jewish Indiana Jones, Rabbi Sollish, who's going to be joining us live online on Zoom to present the underground secrets of the Temple Mount. This is going to be a live, online, and interactive exploration of some of the greatest secrets and mysteries that were uncovered beneath the Temple Mount in recent years that will blow you away. So Sunday evening, I believe the start time, I think, is 7 p.m. Join us. You can find out more information, intownjewishacademy.org/temple secrets. So join me for temple secrets, archaeological secrets, Temple Mount secrets, Jewish secrets, Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Okay, that's it. Well, that's not it, but now that's all I wanted to say. Now it's your turn. Any questions, comments? I'm here.
Rabbi, you missed my joke.
Oh my gosh, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not this old house.
I love it.
Synagogue.
Yes, this old synagogue. Yes. I love it. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. It would be a shame if I had missed that. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, or jokes?
Will
It's
there
gotta
be,
be.
will
Yeah.
there be a PDF for Sunday?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure how he does it. I can ask him. I don't think I imagine it's probably going to be like pictures, a slideshow that he's going to show as he takes us on the tour. It's going to be great though, because sometimes if you're in like a theater looking at a screen, it might be hard to see. But if we make this full screen, you got your computer or your phone right in front of you. I mean, you're locked in. You're right there. Look, you can't go to Israel now. You can't go to Israel. Right? It's shut down, no tourism. But guess what? You can travel to Israel Sunday at 7. Hey, I'm just doing more commercials here. Sunday at 7, you can travel to Israel and go beneath where most people don't go. So you don't want to miss this. This is very cool.
Rabbi Ari, for those of us who have a conflict on Sunday nights, is this going to be recorded by chance?
That's a really good question. I need to, you know what? He may have asked me not to.
Oh, okay.
One second. I need to look back at I don't know if you WhatsApped me about this or emailed me, because we've been communicating through both. I believe that wait, hold on. Let me see. Hold on. No, it must be email. I think he told me not to publicly, not to publicly publish it on YouTube, but I think he did say that for participants, we could put it up. We could put it up. One second. Where is he? Oh, here we go. If you would like to record the Zoom session, please do so for internal purposes only. For example, if posting to YouTube for your community, only post as unlisted. Okay, so that means he is allowing posting unlisted. I can send you the link. Unlisted means basically if you're searching, or if you go to Intown Jewish Academy and just look at what the videos, you won't find it unless you have the direct link to it, and then it's accessible. So I just read it and confirmed we have the green light to record it and to publish it, not publicly, but unlisted. So if you can't make it live Sunday, no worries. Just let me know and we can get you on it, and I will send you individually the link after the event, as long as you remind me.
Rabbi, I have one question. You said God does not violate his own commandments, like thou shalt not kill. But right. I'm thinking about like when God opened up the earth and all the families of the spies.
Good.
He killed.
Excellent question. So it means only one of two things. Either God didn't kill, but he did. Or just like the do not kill in Torah is not just in all cases. For example, if somebody is a threat to life, etc., then and there is capital punishment in Jewish law as well. So in certain cases, even human courts are allowed to apply capital punishment and irreversible consequences. God abides by the same rules. Now, how do we understand what warrants this, that, or the other? Well, we know at least some of the laws regarding the Jewish courts. And God would probably abide by the same thing. If it gets to that level, if it rises to that level, God would step in. So we have to assume that it rose to that level. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
I kind of hate to ask this question, but sort of like the Holocaust was a big destruction, and as a result of that destruction, we had the state of Israel. So I hate to link those two, but I don't know. I'm just wondering, maybe the Rebbe came up with this idea because he was kind of thinking of that in the back of his mind.
It's an excellent point, but I will tell you that the Rebbe was very much against rationalizing or defending the Holocaust specifically. Now, I know that we almost did the same thing tonight with the destruction of the temple, but the reason why we did that is because the ancient, because the sages of the past did that. For example, the medrash that I read to you before about the cows, one time the cow moves and it's the temple's destroyed. The next time it's Mashiach is born. That's where our sages, the sages of old, linked this notion of building right after the destruction, or the destruction being linked to the building. That link was made. Whereas when it comes to the Holocaust, that link is not directly made in that context because we don't have ancient teachings on it. And to do so, the Rebbe said, would be, in essence, defending God. And it's so raw and it's so devastating that the Rebbe said, we don't need to be God's defenders on this one. And I know it may sound like, well, it may sound inconsistent. I mean, either everything that happens is from God and therefore it must be some sort of building, or it's not. And how do you have it both ways? I understand how logically and with intellectual integrity, you would have to apply it also to the Holocaust. But the fact is, the Rebbe was very, very, very not on board with that approach. In fact, when people would give rationales and say, well, for example, the Holocaust had to happen for the state of Israel to happen or whatever, the Rebbe was always like, we don't need to explain the Holocaust. In other words, to defend it. And my understanding is, and this is just my understanding, so take it with a grain of salt or for what it's worth, is that the Rebbe wanted to keep us with the Holocaust in a state of rejecting it. When I say rejecting it, meaning, because once you explain something, then it becomes better almost. Like it becomes, oh, like I can sleep well at night because I understand it. And I think the Rebbe wanted to keep us in a state of not accepting it as okay or justifying it even in our own minds, in our own spirits, but keeping it as something wrong, something indicative of a gullus, of an exile that we don't want anymore, that we want to be done with. So I think that's my perspective on why that's the case, or just simply because it's fresher or because we don't have the ancient teachings on it. But I understand. I totally get what you're saying, that if we apply the logic that every destruction is for a rebuilding, so then where's the rebuilding? I get it. But I'm just telling you that the same Rebbe that gave that explanation also was very not jumping into that with regards to the Holocaust. Elie Wiesel, I once heard this story. He was speaking to a high school, and one of the students asked, why did God allow the Holocaust to happen? So he said, he looked at this student and he said, if I gave you a good answer, would you be able to sleep better at night? Like what like you want an answer? You don't want an answer. Asking the question why about the Holocaust is really, that's the response. The response is we don't want this. It's not a question that's seeking an answer. When someone's in pain and they're saying why, they don't want a good answer. They want the pain to stop. Well, it would be a similar expression. When it comes to the destruction of the temple, we do have this bedrock of faith and tradition, whether it's ancient midrashim. I even skipped one about the lion. You can look at, if you have the text, if you have the book, you can look at the teaching about the lion that destroyed the lion to be rebuilt by the lion. Whatever, that's its own text. But bottom line is, we do have these ancient teachings and the Hasidic teachings from a few hundred years ago that do clearly state that the temple's destruction was for the rebuilding. So we have that. And that's Shabbat Chazon. Questions, comments? Okay, I'll let you all go for tonight. Tomorrow, Daily Power Parsha, we're back on at 12. Tomorrow night, we're back on for Tanya at 8 p.m. Think different. Don't forget Sunday. Please join us and please spread the word. Remember, you don't need to be in Atlanta or really anywhere. I mean, you need to be somewhere, but you don't need to be anywhere specific to join us for this incredible archaeological dig of the Temple Mount. Anywhere that you have an internet connection. So spread it to family and friends, whether they're here or elsewhere. And looking forward to seeing everybody. Okay, thank you. And God bless all of us. We have the strength to see difficult moments through and achieve the purpose, the higher purpose, and the building. All right, Laila Tov. Have a good night. Take care, everybody.